On 6th of September 2014, a retired businessman named Russell Edwards sent a press release to every major newspaper in Britain. It read, "The mystery of Jack the Ripper had been solved." By the following morning, that claim was the lead story in the Daily Mail, the Guardian and the Times. Edwards said he had recovered a Victorian shawl, had its stain analysed by a forensic geneticist at Liverpool John Moores University, and had matched the DNA to a named suspect. The announcement ran in 32 countries. A scientist co-authored a paper in the Journal of Forensic Sciences confirming it. The official evidence inventory for Mitre Square, where the shawl was allegedly recovered, lists 14 items logged that night. The shawl is not among them. That is where the case file begins. Before we reach the science, we need to establish what this case actually is. Because Jack the Ripper is a name. It is not a fact. The name appears for the first time in a letter received by the Central News Agency on the 27th of September 1888. Scotland Yard later concluded that letter was almost certainly a hoax, written by a journalist looking for copy. The name stuck anyway. It always does. The murders began in August 1888 in Whitechapel and Spitalfields in the East End of London. The area was among the most densely populated in Europe. Approximately 900 people per acre in some streets. Unemployment was close to 30% in parts of the borough. The 5 canonical victims are the agreed core of the case: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. The first, Nichols, was 43 years old, a mother of 5 separated from her husband. She died on Bucks Row on the 31st of August 1888. She had 3.5 pence in her pocket, enough for a bed in a common doss house. The last, Kelly, was 25. Irish, originally from County Limerick, she had moved to London in the early 1880s and was living in a single rented room at 13 Miller's Court, off Dorset Street, for 4 shillings a week. She was the only victim murdered indoors. Dr. Thomas Bond examined Kelly's body on the morning of 9th of November 1888. His report runs to 11 pages. The mutilation he described placed her case in a different category from the other 4, not just in scale, but in the time it would have required. Bond estimated the killer spent between 1 and 2 hours inside that room. That detail will matter later. Here is what the official evidence log from Mitre Square says was recovered on the night of Catherine Eddowes' murder. 14 items are listed. The shawl is not among them. There is no note of its removal. There is no chain of custody document of any kind. We will come back to this. The Metropolitan Police investigation into the Whitechapel murders generated over 1,600 documents in 1888 alone. Those files are held at the National Archives in Kew, partially declassified in the 1970s, the remainder released through the 1990s. What they show is a well-resourced investigation hampered by a specific and documented problem. The killer left no recoverable forensic trace, not because the police were incompetent. The Metropolitan Police in 1888 were among the largest detective forces in the world. They conducted systematic door-to-door inquiries, tracked over 2,000 individuals, and coordinated with the City of London Police after the double murder on the 30th of September. The problem was simpler. Every murder took place outdoors or in a single rented room with no witness to the act itself. There is one partial exception. At the Berners Street murder on 30th of September, Elizabeth Stride, a witness named Israel Schwartz, reported seeing a man assault a woman near Duckfield's yard at approximately 12:45 a.m. He did not witness the killing, but he gave police a description: approximately 5 foot 5 inches, aged 30, dark complexion, small brown moustache, dark peaked cap. That description was logged. It was never matched to a charged suspect. However, by early 1889, the Metropolitan Police had settled on a primary suspect. His name was Aaron Kosminski. Kosminski was a Polish-Jewish immigrant barber. He had arrived in London around 1882 and was living in Whitechapel at the time of the murders. Dark complexion, slight build, small moustache. He was committed to Mile End Old Town Workhouse in July 1890, transferred to Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum in February 1891 and died there in 1919. The key document is a file written by Assistant Commissioner Robert Anderson. It was not published in his lifetime. When Anderson wrote about Kosminski in his 1910 memoir, he described the suspect only as a low-class Polish Jew. The internal file is more specific. Anderson wrote that a fellow Jew had witnessed Kosminski in connection with one of the murders and had positively identified him at a formal confrontation. Anderson wrote that this witness had then refused to testify against a fellow Jew. That statement, written more than 20 years after the murders by a senior official with direct access to the original investigation, is the strongest documented claim in the entire official record that police believed they knew who the Ripper was. It is not proof, but it is a specific claim in a primary source document. The problem is corroboration. There is no second document in the National Archives that confirmed this identification took place. The name of the witness was never officially recorded. The date of the confrontation was never recorded. The nature of the identification, whether a lineup, a chance encounter, or a photograph, was never recorded. That gap has kept this case open for 130 years. In the absence of a documented resolution, the Ripper industry filled it. Across the 20th century, the suspect list grew to include Prince Albert Victor, Queen Victoria's grandson; Montague John Druitt, a barrister who drowned in the Thames shortly after the final murder; Walter Sickert, the painter; a Masonic conspiracy involving multiple perpetrators, and a high-level establishment cover-up. Most of these theories share one characteristic: they are constructed from inference, not from documents. They fill the gap that Anderson left. In 1976, the Metropolitan Police commissioned an internal review of the Ripper files. The review team concluded that Kosminski remained the strongest suspect in the surviving documentation. That review was classified at the time it was written. It was released under a Freedom of Information request in 2006. I want to pause here, because what comes next is the part that gets cited in headlines as a final answer. The DNA announcement in 2014 was reported as confirmation. What the forensic record actually shows is a different question entirely. And the gap matters. The Shawl Russell Edwards, purchased at auction in 2007, was said to have been recovered from the murder scene of Catherine Eddowes at Mitre Square on the 30th of September 1888. The account runs as follows. Acting Sergeant Amos Simpson of the Metropolitan Police removed the shawl from the scene that night and took it home as a souvenir rather than entering it as evidence. It passed through the Simpson family for over a century before being sold. There is no official record of this in any Metropolitan Police document. The evidence inventory for Mitre Square lists 14 items recovered that night. The shawl is not among them. There is no note of Simpson's name in connection with the scene. No chain of custody document of any kind. Edwards commissioned Dr. Jari Lohelianen at Liverpool John Moores University to analyse stains on the shawl. Lohelianen used mitochondrial DNA analysis, which traced the maternal line, not an individual. The published paper in the Journal of Forensic Sciences claims two matches, one between stains on the shawl and a living descendant of Catherine Eddowes, and one between other stains and a living descendant from Aaron Kosminski's maternal line. 3 independent forensic scientists responded publicly within 72 hours of publication. Dr. John Buckleton, one of the leading forensic DNA statisticians in the world, stated the statistical basis of the match was unclear and the chain of custody undermined any evidential value. Professor Sir Alec Jeffreys, the scientist who invented DNA fingerprinting in 1984, stated that the evidence was, and I am quoting his exact words, an interesting but far from convincing analysis. The specific technical problems Jeffreys identified is this: mitochondrial DNA is not unique to an individual. It is shared by every person descended from the same maternal ancestor. That population can number tens of thousands of people across multiple generations and multiple continents. A mitochondrial DNA match does not identify a person. It identifies a genetic group. For the match to mean what Edwards claimed it meant, you would need to establish that no other woman from Kosminski's maternal line had ever come into contact with that shawl across 126 years of handling. That has not been established. It cannot be established. In 2019, a second research team re-examined the published data. They found an additional problem. One of the key mitochondrial sequences used in the original match had been reclassified in the reference database in the years since publication. The match was based partly on a reading the current database does not support in the same way. Lehelianen has disputed that finding. The dispute is unresolved. The paper has never been retracted. Here is what the documented record actually shows. 1. The Metropolitan Police identified a primary suspect in 1889. They had a witness. They did not prosecute. 2. The reason they did not prosecute is written in an official document by a senior official more than 20 years after the fact. It was not lack of evidence. It was the refusal of a witness to testify. 3. The 2014 DNA announcement does not close that record. It adds a forensic claim to a chain of custody with no official origin, using a methodology that cannot produce individual identification, based on a shawl not listed in any crime scene inventory. The question the Ripper case actually raises is not about identity. It was always about the gap between what the police knew and what they were prepared to prosecute. Anderson's file is explicit. Someone saw Kosminski with a victim. That person identified him at a confrontation, and then the case stopped. That is not a mystery. That is a decision. Why that decision was made, whether it was practical, institutional, or something else entirely, is not recorded anywhere in the National Archives. But the gap in the official record is not a gap created by a lack of evidence. It is a gap created by the absence of documentation that should exist. A senior official witnessed a formal identification. The witness was never named. The date was never recorded. The outcome was never filed. The Ripper files are not an unsolved case in the conventional sense. They are a case where the investigation reached a conclusion, and the conclusion was quietly set aside. The next case file covers a situation where the official record and the forensic evidence say two completely different things, where that gap was allowed to stand for over 30 years until a single document changed everything. That case file is already uploaded.